Hey everyone, welcome to the Actual Images Signal Culture Modular App tutorial. Actual Images is a 4-channel sequencer and optical flow distortion engine that can take up to 4 videos and sequence them, add video rates, as well as using flow in different directions and swirls and all kinds of things to further abstract those types of images, all in real time. One thing to note, this is going to be the longest tutorial we've ever done. I'm going to be kind of slow to explain each of the parts in a very precise way. So please, if you've seen part of this tutorial and you want to kind of move on to the next, but you don't want to do it all at once, make sure to look on our Vimeo showcase and on YouTube for the extra parts. So what does it mean to sequence things at video oscillator rates, or what is an oscillator even? Well, oscillators, right, in the audio world, as you can think about it, also exist in the video world, right? We have different waveforms. There's sine waves, which don't have a pure peak or valley. They're kind of exponentially curved as well. You have triangle waves, which do have peaks and valleys. You have square waves, which are just on and off. And you have all the things in between, ramps and such. Oscillators, when sequencing, determine essentially what looks like an edit. So when we switch these things at oscillators, we can switch it as if we're kind of like doing very slow editing, or we can actually edit, right, in that kind of way, or sequence faster than the screen can refresh itself. And so therefore, you can create shapes and patterns, not only against the normal scanning rate of video, but you can also work with what's called phase modulation and frequency modulation to manipulate that video rate oscillator. I'll explain more about those as we go through each bit of the process. But just so you have an idea of what it is that we're doing in this first part, we're mainly going to be working with the oscillators. Now, there are 3 oscillators in the top right of the Actual Images app. One is called main oscillator, and that's the one that's going to set the tone for everything. That is your video rate oscillator, okay? And that's going to set what is the frequency that the 4 channels are going to sequence at. As you can see on the left here, in the input amplifier, you have 4 different videos. You can do sequence between 4 videos. You can sequence between 3 or 2. All those are determined by the number of channels right here. And we can see that all 4 siphon inputs are lined up here. The X's are checked. And in Actual Images, we don't actually have the boxes that we normally do, because I just wanted to make it a little bit easier for everyone. So whatever you're setting to the siphon system, whether it's from our input amplifier or other applications, they can become channels in your sequencer. Okay? And if you don't see those channels, you can always hit refresh. As long as they're broadcasting, it'll populate in the drop downs. Okay. So I'm going to start with 4 because I already have things queued up, right? Notice that one is of me as a live image, and I also have 3 pre-recorded images. If I then go over to video rate oscillator and I slowly bring up what's called LFO, it's going to default to a sine wave. So remember that kind of exponential curve. If I bring this up very slowly, notice that it's a very slow edit between each of the videos. And it's like not even a real edit. It's kind of like a crossfade, right? And that's kind of what that sine wave will do. Similarly, if I do that same thing with a triangle wave, it's actually going to look really similar. So on the right here, I brought the attenuator all the way down for sine wave, and I brought triangle wave all the way up. And now if I bring that LFO up again, well, it kind of looks just the same, right? But it isn't. What you are seeing is it kind of fully going to one video before it then moves on to the next. Now, if I bring this LFO up more, we can see it moves faster and faster and faster and faster. Okay? So what does that mean? Well, that means that as it transitions, right, it'll cycle through 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. If you want to cycle different things, you can always choose new videos from your dropdown and mess that order up. So that those things can actually be also performed by you in real time. If I were to use the square wave instead, right, I'm going to bring square wave up. Notice it's a jump cut, right? And we're jumping from one video to the next. So with that in mind, we can kind of get the sense of the wave shape. Now, how do we make this a little bit more interesting? This isn't an editing engine, right? That's because we have two different knobs, and all the oscillators have these knobs. There's the frequency knob, see on the left where it says frequency and it has the red numbers in it. That's going to be your main knob kind of going up and down, right? Frequency is going to set the baseline frequency of everything. And you can, this is going to be what's called a rotary encoder, right? Or it's a modulating rotary encoder, which means you can just turn it in ad infinitum, right? And the more you turn it, the more the numbers will accumulate upwards to the frequencies that you want. Okay. The fine knob will always be in relationship to the frequency knob. The fine knob is if you kind of start getting up to certain frequencies and then you want to really fine tune it, make the numbers maybe a little bit smaller in nature so you can really get that frequency that you want, you turn the fine knob back and forth. That is not a rotary encoder, however. So it has a certain range and it's always in relationship to that frequency knob. In addition, before we kind of get into that, notice we have 4 different categories that you can check between. There's narrow, medium, coarse, and coarse plus. What that means is that as you turn the frequency knob normally on narrow, it's only going to have a certain range of numbers. And every time you choose a higher number, let's say like medium or coarse, that means it's going to sweep up that number range much faster. So it's more about really kind of getting things to a certain point. If you don't want to use that rotor knob, you can also just type in the number that you want in the manual frequency, and that'll switch. It'll normalize everything to the frequency that you want to be working at. So let's talk about what does it mean to go into higher frequencies. Well, I'm going to start with square wave, and I'm just going to put this up, and notice I go up, and as I'm going up these numbers, so 9, 12, notice it's sequencing almost like it's layering the image because it's flickering now. And it keeps going and going. We go past that. And around 60, we start to see these weird bars, but it's still flickering. And then as we get close to 120, and this is at 119. If I were to put it directly at 120, we would just have the bars as such. So why do we have bars? Well, essentially at 120 hertz, right, we are sequencing all these videos faster than the computer can resolve them. Now, if I want to have all these working at twice the normal scanning of video, right, I would have this at 120, and at 120 it would be stable. If I do a little bit above that kind of 120 baseline, it'll travel upwards or downwards in relationship to it. So notice if I do 121, it's traveling the other direction, so on and so forth. Okay, and that's just how these systems are designed. Now, if you kind of go faster and faster and faster through those, right, they switch faster. And if you get into like a halfway point between, let's say like 180, we're starting to get combinations because it's not quite right at that one frequency. So this is what's called a free running oscillator. And as we get up to 240, notice we're doubling what we had. Now you may ask yourself, well, this doesn't work exactly. Like if you know something about video synthesis, this isn't exactly it. Well, it's because we have 4 channels of sequencing. If I were to bring this number of channels down to 2, right, notice that it's halved because the scan rates are going to be different, right? If it's only 2 channels, now at 60 before 60 was flickering, that's because it was at 4 channels. But because we're flickering at just between 2 images, it's actually doing that on 2 channels at 60 hertz. And as we can see, it's just me and this one other thing. If I were to switch the number of channels to 3, this would still be flickering. And so I would have to kind of bring this up to about 90, right? Because it's 3 channels to flicker against that particular number. So depending on the amount of channels, especially how the sequencer is going to behave is going to be slightly different, okay? So again, we're thinking about multiples of how video scans against how many channels of video we're flickering between, okay? And we can get them to be free running. If you don't want a free run, you could also lock your oscillator. So there are these options down here for lock vertical sync and such. If I were to lock it, well, notice it no longer runs. And as I just kind of like go up, right, it just kind of follows with it. There's reasons to lock and reasons to free run. It's really an aesthetic choice, but it's also a functional choice. So if I were to kind of look at, well, what do these oscillations do? Well, that's a square wave, okay? Sine wave, right? See how that exponential curve? Nothing's like fully there, fully gone. Triangle wave, we do get to a point where it is a bit sharper than sine wave, okay? Now, there are 2 other controls here. When I'm on triangle, right, if I actually play with the ramp and I put the ramp to the right or left, that's going to be 2 different directions of sawtooth wave. Sawtooth is it starts at a point and then ramps down. Starts at a point, ramps down. So if I were to bring the ramp to the right, notice that we have a fade to a sharp line and then fade to a sharp line the other way. Now, if I were to go to square wave here, and I were to work with what's called PWM, that's pulse width modulation. Pulse width is just like, well, how much timing, right? It's kind of a weird thing because we think about timing in a different way, but if it's just off and on, if I were to widen or shrink the pulse width, it's going to actually just widen the amount of time that a thing is on or not. So see now I do it like this. A couple of the videos actually have a lot less time on screen, right? But they're being sequenced so quickly that we see them as thicker or thinner lines, okay? So on and so forth. And so you can play with the pulse width in either direction and have fun with that. So now that you understand how that's working, well, what happens when we go to higher rates, right? If I lock my vertical oscillator, by the way, if you're at these frequencies, you lock horizontal, it's not going to do much of anything because the horizontal is kind of like not even working against the sequencer at this point. You'll see what lock horizontal looks like at higher frequencies. If I go into medium, notice as I bring this up and up and up, it gets to be so many tiny little lines. And you're like, okay, well now it just looks like you were looking through a screen. What's the point of going higher? Well, the point of going higher, you may notice that it's starting to go diagonal, but it's like this weird combinations of diagonal. Oh, you see it coming? There's the diagonals, and now we have vertical lines. Okay. Now that I got up to that medium, I'm going to work with my fine tuning on the narrow band and get my vertical just right. Now at 2 channels, I have 1 vertical band at 64,800. Okay. If you do the math, you know what to do, right? If I want to do this on 4 channels, this would be double this, right? And if it's at 3 channels, it would be 1.5 times this number to get 1 band. Okay. Now, if I were to unlock this, doesn't do much of anything. If I were to put this 1 frame ahead, now, right, it's traveling left to right, or put it down, right to left. And at these frequencies, I can actually now lock horizontal sync. And as I kind of go up now from there, notice it no longer goes diagonal, right? It's not going diagonal anymore, but it is flickering the vertical. If If I were to lock vertical sync and this together, well, let's go up the coarse range here. Notice that we get more and more and more bars. And if we were to unlock them, well, you'd have a very different look, right? So there's reasons to lock these things at different rates. And if you unlock the vertical, we can get those things flickering. If you like that kind of flicker look, or you like things to move, right, with the multiple bars, depending on the frequency, it'll do these kinds of things. Now, we can go up and up and up. And notice that I'm going between narrow, medium, and coarse. If I were to kind of try to turn these knobs, by the way, to turn them, swiping up and down is the best way to do road encoder, not left to right. Okay. As I kind of go up and up and up, I actually want to use my coarser knobs because, well, this is at 552, 719. At narrow, right, it's going to take a very long time to get there. So using these knobs to find your range is actually advisable. Okay. Now, if I go to Coarse Plus here, and I bring this all the way up, we're going to see some interesting phenomena. You may start to notice that the color shifting may seem just a little bit off, right? And that's because we're actually about to go to subcarrier frequencies. And if I were to unlock this, you starting to see that? If I lock my vertical sync, we can see that the subcarrier frequency is the color information in video. And in fact, we can kind of go all the way up here. And now technically, to get it to be a fully just phasing of color, right? It's 357, 9545. And now it's just cycling through these things, and it's just the video. And I can even bring it up to 4, or I can even just have it to 1. We'll just cycle that color phasing on top right as such. And this is our little color party thing. And we'll get into some cool things we'll do with color party later on. But let's go back down in frequency to see some of the other things that this does. Okay. At 241, things are moving. But we want to see what these other oscillators do. So what is phase modulation? Phase modulation is different from frequency modulation in that it actually works within each of the bands that you see here. It's the phase of the video and how it works between, how it manipulates each video within its sequence. Frequency modulation is going to modulate the entire frequency range in different shaped ways with the video rate oscillator. And these are also lockable. So there's a lot of variables here on how to make some really interesting shapes, because you may not just want bars going this way or bars going this way. Maybe you want the shapes to be more dynamic, and that's how we would shape them with the not only the frequency but what the oscillator shape is. So is it a sine wave, is it a triangle, is it a square, etc. So at this frequency, first off, we have in both the phase modulation and frequency modulation oscillator, there's what's called a frequency modulation attenuator. And that sets, right, whether it's to the left or to the right or straight up. Now that is the minus or plus of the modulation. If it's straight on and there's an attenuator reset, if it's straight on, it's no longer being affected. But if it's to the left or right in any which way, it's either affecting it more or affecting it less, depending on how far away it is from center. Okay, so I know that's going to take a little bit of time to get used to, but you'll see what I mean here in a second. So I'm going to first turn up sine wave, and I'm going to do PM modulator to the right, and you're not going to see anything because we don't really have a sequence. But if I were to turn this up a little bit, notice that it's modulating that as such. And as I kind of go up here, notice how it's ever so slightly using a sine wave to modulate it as such, right? We're modulating what's happening within each of those bands. If I were to use a square wave instead, looks very different. If I were to use a triangle wave, that looks pretty different. Or a ramp. But the great thing is you can mix these. And depending on the mix of those oscillations or the direction of the attenuator, they work slightly differently. Now you can lock those to vertical sync, but it's not going to do a ton, right, at this frequency, but you can see that it's doing some things. If I kind of go up in frequency, notice that the phase modulation gets more and more and more complex. Ultimately, the main video rate oscillator is staying the same. We're just having more dynamic modulations inside of it. Okay. Now, if I were to bring this back down to frequency here, let's bring the channels back down to 2. And I'm going to put 64800 up here in the video rate oscillator. Notice that now that we're at those vertical rates, right, suddenly the phase modulation, well, that looks kind of crazy, right? And this is where we can start to see sine waves come in, and the amount that they affected is based on the attenuation. And notice it's wiggling the sides here, right? And the more you attenuate it up, the more it goes. If I were to use a square wave instead, notice it's squares and our pulse width modulation here, right? The more you do it, the more it works in either direction. And then finally triangle, we can see the triangles are working in this way. And right now it's actually a sawtooth. If I bring this ramp up to center, we can see it's triangles, and we can watch the ramp go the other direction for a reverse sawtooth, okay? Now, what happens if you start to combine it with, look, the amount of sine wave and that together? Well, now it's creating some weird shapes. And the more we attenuate that up, and let's maybe bring some squares in here and create some really weird dynamic shapes, depending on how you're going to adjust that. And that's locking that sync. If I were to free run it, you can see how it's going to work against it as such. And the higher I go, the more fine it gets, because it's all in relationship to that video rate oscillator, right? So if I were to slow this down quite a bit, you would see things work in certain ways, okay? As it goes down and down and down, now that it's at really slow, these are really big chunky pieces. So that's how the phase modulation works. Now, I'm not going to go over every combination that you can do. One of the things I would suggest, though, is like maybe bring your video rate oscillator down to 240, right? And then bring your phase modulation up to 64800, right? Notice it's a very, very different feel. If I were to kind of lock that vertical rate and kind of bring it up, the higher I go, right? And let's actually even double this. Notice we're getting the phase modulation. We have horizontal bars, but the phase modulation is in the vertical areas, right? So again, the amount of attenuation and the shape is going to give you really dynamic differences in there, okay? And so the question is, well, what about frequency modulation? Well, frequency modulation, if we were to work with sine waves, right? And let's get that in a little bit. Notice it's actually affecting against the video rate oscillator. And it's starting to look a little bit similar to phase modulation, but when they're done together, it actually does really different things. I'm putting it at 64800. And notice it's starting to make it move in interesting little ways. And if I were to then bring some of that phase modulation in there as well, right? Notice, especially if we unlock them a little bit, you can start to get some really dynamic movements between those. If we put those up to 4, we can see now we have 4 videos being sequenced within all this. So the frequency modulation is going to offset the range that the video rate oscillator is able to go. And that's different from the phase modulation, because the phase modulation is what's happening within those phases of the sequence. Okay. Yeah, so you can really bring in some pretty dynamic shapes. And we can see it wiggling inside of the phase modulation now. It gets pretty crazy. And you can bring these up really high and just kind of have a blast with it, where now we have shapes, but we also have these kind of weird lines. And, well, as I said before, the combinations can really be endless. So, again, your video rate oscillator sets the basic rate, right? As we can see here, we're kind of just going to go up into color party territory and do some crazy things. So how did it get here? Well, first off, I went up to color party territory with my video rate oscillator, and I have phase modulation kind of working at this certain rates, and I have frequency modulation also working. I've locked them in order to kind of get certain types of looks and feels of how these things are supposed to go. And amount of attenuation really matters, as you can see here. So these are really dynamic types of manipulations that you can do. The important thing, though, is making sure that you feel the need to kind of like find things. I have not seen every combination of oscillations. So to give you presets would kind of be besides the point. We want to be able to discover our images, and there's a lot of ways to discover these images using the video rate oscillator. Okay. So the oscillators work in really interesting ways. Now, this is the end of part 1. We're going to talk a little bit more about other things that you can do with oscillations in part 2, as well as the optical flow engine. So make sure to stay tuned for that. And thank you all for joining me, and we'll see you next time in the second video. Thanks. Bye.